I caught my husband cheating at our anniversary restaurant. My revenge plan shocked everyone. Have you ever discovered a secret so devastating that it didn't just break your heart? It shattered your entire understanding of who you were. I'm Vivian Harper, and 5 years ago I lost my sister Claire in a car accident that I've blamed myself for every single day since. I threw myself into my work as an architect, designing memorial gardens for other people's grief, because I couldn't face my own. My husband Daniel held me through it all, or so I thought. But one Tuesday night in Portland, a single text message on Daniel's phone revealed that the life I'd been living was built on lies so intricate they involved not just my husband, but my former best friend, a secret pregnancy from 15 years ago, and a betrayal that went deeper than I ever imagined possible. This is the story of how I lost everything: my marriage, my business partnership, my belief in the people I loved most, and how I found myself in the ruins. It's about the night I orchestrated the most carefully planned confrontation of my life at the same restaurant where Daniel proposed to me 7 years ago. And it's about learning that sometimes the most devastating betrayals are the ones that finally set you free. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to choose between comfortable lies and painful truths, please hit that like button and subscribe. Because what I'm about to share isn't just about revenge. It's about refusing to be anyone's second choice, including your own. Let's begin. The last time I stood at my sister's grave, I was a wife, a business owner, a woman who believed she understood the price of guilt. Tonight I'm standing here again, no longer a wife, soon to be no longer a partner in the firm I built. But for the first time in 5 years, I can finally breathe. Let me tell you how I got here. It was a Tuesday in October when my marriage ended, though I wouldn't sign the divorce papers for another 3 months. The Portland rain was doing what it does best, turning the city into a watercolor painting, all bleeding edges and soft focus. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Pearl District loft, I could see the Willamette River moving like liquid silver under the streetlights. I was bent over my drafting table, working on the design that had consumed me for months, a memorial garden for Claire. 5 years since the accident, and I still couldn't get the curve of the pathways right. Every line I drew felt like an apology I'd never be able to make. Daniel was in the shower. I could hear him singing off-key the way he always did when he thought no one was listening. It was such a normal sound, such a husband sound, the kind of thing that makes you believe you know someone completely. His phone buzzed on the marble kitchen counter. I wasn't the kind of wife who checked her husband's phone. I believed in privacy, in trust in the sanctity of the space between two people who'd chosen each other. But something about that particular buzz at 9:43 on a Tuesday night made me look up from the memorial plans that would never bring my sister back. The notification was visible on his lock screen, just enough to read without unlocking. Marketing Director Rachel. Dinner reservation confirmed at Le Pigeon Thursday 8 p.m. Private table overlooking the river just like you wanted. Can't wait to finally... The message cut off there. Le Pigeon, our restaurant. The place where Daniel had proposed 7 years ago, where we celebrated every anniversary, where we'd shared our dreams of expanding the firm, and maybe someday starting a family that would somehow make up for the family I'd lost. My hands were shaking. I set down my drafting pencil very carefully, as if the small act of control could stop the world from tilting on its axis. The water in the shower was still running. Daniel was still singing. The rain was still falling. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 60 seconds ago, except that I now knew my life was a lie. I picked up the phone. It unlocked immediately. The passcode was our wedding date, just like it had always been. Some betrayals come gift-wrapped in the symbols of love. The text thread with Marketing Director Rachel was right there at the top of his messages. I opened it with the kind of numb detachment that comes right before the real pain hits, like the moment after you cut yourself but before you start bleeding. The messages went back months. Daniel, today's client meeting was exhausting. Wish you'd been there. Rachel. Next time, although I'm more interested in our after-hours meetings. Daniel, same. V has been so distant lately, buried in that memorial project. Sometimes I feel like I'm living with a ghost. Rachel. You deserve someone who sees you, not someone lost in the past. I scrolled backwards through time, watching my marriage decompose in real time. Professional messages that became flirtatious. Flirtations that became plans. Plans that became hotel confirmations. And then I saw the name that made everything so much worse. Rachel. I told Thomas I'm visiting my mother this weekend. He still doesn't suspect anything. Thomas. I sat down on the kitchen bar stool because my legs had stopped working. Thomas Bennett, Dr. Thomas Bennett, child psychologist, which meant Rachel was Rachel Morgan Bennett, which meant marketing director Rachel wasn't just some random employee Daniel had hired 18 months ago when we decided to expand our firm. Rachel Morgan had been my best friend through college. Rachel Morgan had been my maid of honor. Rachel Morgan was the only person I had ever told the truth about Claire's death. The truth I'd never even told Daniel. 5 years earlier, 2 weeks after Claire died drunk on grief and wine. Rach, I killed her. Vivian, it was an accident. No, listen, she called me that morning, asked me to drive her to the airport because her car was making a weird noise. I said no. I had that meeting with the museum board, remember the one I'd been preparing for months? I told her to just take her car, that it was probably nothing. You couldn't have known? The weird noise was her brake line failing. She crashed because she couldn't stop. If I'd just driven her, if I just canceled one meeting, she'd still be alive. I chose my career over my sister's life, and now she's dead, and I have to live with that forever. Rachel had held me while I sobbed. You didn't kill her, Viv. You made a choice based on the information you had. That's not the same thing. But it was. It was exactly the same thing. See, I kept scrolling through the messages looking for something I wasn't sure I wanted to find. And there it was. 3 months ago. Daniel. I'm worried about V. The guilt over Claire is eating her alive. She won't talk to me about it, won't talk to anyone, just buries herself in work. Rachel. She told me once that she blames herself for Claire's death, that she could have prevented it. It's tragic, but Daniel, you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Daniel, I just feel so helpless, like I'm losing her to a ghost. Rachel, then maybe it's time to stop trying. Maybe it's time to choose yourself for once. My husband had told my former best friend the deepest, most painful secret I'd ever shared with anyone. And they'd used it? Used my guilt, my grief to justify sleeping together. The water in the shower stopped. I very carefully put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, notification still glowing on the screen. Then I walked to the living room and sat down at my laptop, opening the memorial garden plans as if I'd been working on them the whole time. My hands had stopped shaking. Something cold and clear had settled into my chest, right where my heart used to be. Daniel emerged from the bathroom in his robe, toweling his dark hair. Still working, Viv. You need to take breaks. This memorial project is consuming you. I looked up at my husband, really looked at him. At 42, Daniel Kim was still handsome in that way that had first attracted me in graduate school. Strong jawline, intelligent eyes, the kind of presence that made clients trust him immediately. But now I was searching his face for signs of deception I'd somehow missed. The new cologne I'd noticed but hadn't questioned. The extra attention to his appearance lately. The way he'd suddenly started going to the gym 4 times a week. The client meetings that ran late. The weekend site visits to properties I'd later discovered didn't exist. How long had I been living with a stranger? Just trying to get the emotional flow right, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Claire would have loved this design. Daniel's expression softened, or was it just another performance? I know she would. And I know she'd want you to take care of yourself, too. You've been working on this for months, Viv. Maybe it's time to, I don't know, talk to someone. A therapist. Speaking of work, I said carefully, watching his face. How's the Portland Heights project going? You mentioned Rachel wanted to discuss the marketing strategy. I saw it. Just for a split second, a flicker of something in his eyes. Fear, guilt, excitement at hearing her name. Oh, that. He moved to the refrigerator, not meeting my gaze. Just standard stuff. Rachel has some innovative ideas about reaching younger clients. She thinks we should modernize our digital presence. Another lie delivered as easily as discussing the weather. She seems dedicated, I continued. Late-night calls, weekend planning sessions. We're lucky to have found someone so invested in the firm's success. She really understands our vision, Daniel agreed, finally looking at me. His eyes were so earnest. God, he was good at this. She's been instrumental in landing those new contracts. I nodded and turned back to my laptop, but my mind was racing. How many lies? How many times had he come home from dinner with her and kissed me goodnight, his mouth still warm from whispering intimate things to someone else? How many times had I thanked him for working late, so I could have space to grieve, never knowing he was using my grief as an excuse to betray me. That night I lay awake next to Daniel, listening to his breathing slow into sleep. He was so peaceful, so unburdened by secrets. Meanwhile, I was mentally cataloging every late night at the office, every client emergency, every time he'd encouraged me to stay home and work on the memorial while he handled things at the firm. The memorial that had become my prison. The grief work that had given him permission to build an entire secret life. I stared at the ceiling of our bedroom, this room we'd painted together, where we'd made love, where I'd cried in his arms after Claire died and felt something inside me crystallize into diamond-hard clarity. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to confront him immediately with tears and accusations. I was going to do what I did best. I was going to plan, design, and construct a response as carefully as I'd design a building, because the greatest structures aren't built from rage. They're built from precision. "What would you do, Claire?" I whispered into the darkness. But I already knew. Claire had never let anyone make her feel small. Claire had never accepted less than she deserved. Claire had been the strong sister, the brave one, the one who spoke truth even when it was uncomfortable. Maybe it was time I learned from her. By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Daniel immediately. I was going to investigate first. Because if I'd learned anything from designing memorial gardens, it was this: you have to understand the full scope of what you're working with before you can build something meaningful. And I had a feeling that the affair was just the surface. There were deeper foundations here, older structures I hadn't yet excavated. Wednesday morning, Daniel left for what he claimed was a site visit to Salem. I waited 30 minutes, then got to work. Finding information about Rachel Morgan Bennett proved easier than expected. LinkedIn told me she'd moved to Portland 18 months ago, right around the time Daniel had insisted we needed to expand our marketing department. Before that, she'd been in San Francisco working for a tech startup. But there was a gap. 3 years unaccounted for right after college. The same 3 years when Rachel had disappeared from my life. I'd assumed we'd just grown apart the way college friendships sometimes fade when people move to different cities and start different lives. Now I wondered what else I'd assumed wrong. Facebook showed me photos of Rachel with Dr. Thomas Bennett, a handsome man with kind eyes and wire-rimmed glasses. They'd gotten married 3 years ago, right around the time she resurfaced from that mysterious gap. The photos showed a couple that looked happy, though I noticed something odd in the most recent photos. Rachel was always positioned at angles, always wearing flowing tops, always shot from specific vantage points. She was hiding something, or rather hiding the shape of something. I called in a favor from Sarah Kim, a friend who worked in medical records at OHSU. "Vivian," Sarah said when she called back 2 hours later, "I can't give you specific details, but I can tell you that the person you asked about has been seeing an OB/GYN regularly for the past 4 months. My heart sank. Rachel wasn't just having an affair with my husband. She was pregnant. And if the timeline in those text messages was accurate, there was a very good chance the baby was Daniel's. I hung up and sat in my car outside Lone Fir Cemetery where Claire was buried. I'd driven here on autopilot the way I always did when I needed to think. "I'm sorry, Hermana," I said to Claire's headstone. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I chose work over driving you to the airport. I'm sorry for 5 years of guilt that apparently turned me into someone so absent from my own life that my husband built an entire second existence without me noticing." The stone didn't answer, but I could almost hear Claire's voice anyway, the way she'd sounded when she was alive and fierce and unafraid. "Viv, you didn't kill me. You made a choice. It was the wrong choice, but it wasn't murder. And you know what Daniel made choices too. Lots of them. Every time he texted her, every time he lied to you, every time he let you believe you were the problem, those were choices. So stop punishing yourself and start holding him accountable." I sat there for 2 hours watching the October rain fall on my sister's grave, feeling something shift inside me. The guilt I'd been carrying for 5 years, the weight that had made me so distant, so buried in work, so unavailable to my husband, began to separate from the grief beneath it. I hadn't killed Claire. I'd made a human mistake, a choice based on incomplete information. But Daniel had made dozens of deliberate choices, each one a small betrayal that added up to one massive lie. And Rachel knew. She knew what I was carrying, and she'd slept with my husband anyway. She'd let him tell her my secrets. She'd probably even felt sorry for me while she was booking hotel rooms. I wasn't going to be the victim of this story. I was going to be the architect of what came next. Chapcoy. That evening I did something that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. I called Dr. Thomas Bennett. His practice listing was easy to find a child psychologist specializing in trauma and grief. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dr. Bennett, I said when his receptionist put me through. This is Vivian Harper from Harper & Associates Architecture. I'm working on a memorial garden project, and your expertise in childhood trauma and how children process grief could be invaluable. I was wondering if you might have time this week for a consultation. His voice was exactly what I'd expected from his photos, warm, professional, genuinely kind. That sounds like fascinating work, Ms. Harper. I'd be happy to consult on such a meaningful project. When were you thinking? Would Thursday evening work? I know it's unconventional, but my schedule during regular hours is quite packed. I'd be happy to buy you dinner in exchange for your time. Thursday evening should be fine. Do you have a location preference? I took a breath. This was it, the point of no return. Actually, I have a reservation at Le Pigeon at 8 o'clock. It's a beautiful restaurant, the kind of atmosphere that encourages thoughtful conversation. Do you know it? Le Pigeon, Thomas repeated slowly. Yes, my wife mentioned that restaurant recently. She said it has incredible river views. It does, I said softly. It's the perfect place for revelations. There was a pause. I wondered if he could hear something in my voice, some hint of the truth I was about to detonate in both our lives. Then I'll see you Thursday at 8, he said finally. And Ms. Harper, thank you for reaching out. It's rare that someone considers the psychological aspects of memorial design. Your sister was lucky to have you. I had to close my eyes against the sudden sting of tears. I wasn't there when she needed me most, I said quietly. I'm trying to make up for that now. We all carry guilt for the things we couldn't prevent, Thomas said. But guilt and responsibility aren't always the same thing. I look forward to our conversation. After I hung up, I sat in my studio office looking out at the Portland skyline as dusk settled over the city. In 48 hours, I would orchestrate the most important meeting of my life. 4 people would sit down to dinner, but only 2 of us would know what was really going to happen. I opened my laptop and began planning the evening with the same precision I brought to architectural design. Every detail had to serve the larger purpose. Every element needed to support the structure I was building. By the time Daniel came home that night from a client dinner that I now knew was probably another date with Rachel, I had reserved 2 tables at Le Pigeon, studied the restaurant's layout, and prepared for a conversation that would change all our lives. How was your day, Viv? Daniel asked, kissing my cheek the way he had every day for 12 years. Productive, I replied, and meant it more than he could possibly know. I think I'm finally ready to unveil Claire's memorial design. After 5 years, I'm finally seeing the whole picture clearly. That's wonderful. I'm proud of you for pushing through. I looked at my husband, this man I'd loved, trusted, built a life with, and felt something close to pity. He had no idea that his carefully constructed double life was about to collapse. He thought he was so smart, so careful. He thought I was too buried in grief to notice him slipping away. Daniel, I said, do you believe people deserve the truth even when it hurts? He paused, wineglass halfway to his lips. What do you mean? I mean, is it better to live in a beautiful lie or face a painful truth? He set down the glass slowly. That's philosophical. I suppose it depends on the situation. Why do you ask? I've been thinking about the memorial garden, about how we build monuments to beautiful lies we say people rested peacefully or passed gently, when really they died in pain, in fear, in accidents that could have been prevented. We smooth over the ugly truth to make the living feel better. That's not quite the same thing, isn't it? I turned to face him fully. Don't we all prefer the pretty version of events, the story that lets us sleep at night? Daniel looked uncomfortable. I guess so, but sometimes the truth is too painful. Sometimes mercy is kinder than honesty. Maybe, I said. Or maybe the truth is the only foundation strong enough to build a real life on. I turned back to my memorial plans, but I could feel Daniel watching me, trying to figure out if I meant something more than I was saying. Good. Let him wonder. Thursday was coming, and with it the end of every comfortable lie we'd all been living. Thursday arrived with the kind of crystalline autumn weather that made Portland look like something from a postcard. Mount Hood stood sharp against the blue sky, the Willamette River sparkled in the afternoon sun, and the Japanese maples in Washington Park were putting on their annual display of impossible color. It would have been perfect weather for celebrating an anniversary, if only I were celebrating with the right person. I spent the morning at Claire's grave reviewing the completed memorial design one final time. The plans were beautiful, a circular garden with paths that spiraled inward toward a central fountain surrounded by her favorite flowering trees. It was the best work I'd ever done. "I wish you were here to tell me if I'm doing the right thing," I whispered to the headstone. "You always knew how to handle people who lied to you." The wind moved through the cemetery trees, and I could almost hear Claire's voice. "Viv, you're overthinking it. They lied. You found out. Now you're going to make sure everyone knows the truth. It's not complicated. Stop trying to manage everyone's feelings and just let the consequences happen." At 2 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Daniel, running late tonight. Client emergency in Beaverton. Might not make it home before you leave for your consultation dinner. Love you." Perfect. He was maintaining his lies right until the end, probably planning to tell Rachel he was working late so they could have a romantic dinner at the restaurant where I'd trusted him enough to say yes when he proposed. At 3:30, Dr. Thomas Bennett called. "Ms. Harper, I hope you don't mind me reaching out early, but I've been thinking about your memorial project. The intersection of architecture and psychology and grief processing is quite fascinating. I've actually pulled together some research papers I thought you might find helpful." His enthusiasm was genuine. His kindness was real. It made what I was about to do feel both necessary and terrible. "I appreciate that, Dr. Bennett. I'm looking forward to our conversation." "Please call me Thomas. And Ms. Harper, may I ask, do you have children?" The question surprised me. "No. My husband and we talked about it, but the timing never seemed right." "I understand. My wife and I have been trying for a while. It's been—" He paused. "It's been a source of some tension in our marriage, actually. But I'm hopeful. Children have always been central to my vision of the future." My throat tightened. In a few hours, his hope would be destroyed. He would learn that his wife was pregnant, but probably not with his child. He would learn that she'd been lying to him for months, that the mother's visits and girls' weekends had been hotel rooms with my husband. "Thomas," I said carefully, "I should mention that tonight's conversation might be more emotionally difficult than a typical consultation. The memorial I'm designing, it's personal. And sometimes personal projects reveal truths we weren't expecting to face." "I appreciate the warning," he said. "In my line of work, I've learned that the most important conversations are often the most painful ones. I'll see you at 8. At 6 o'clock, I began preparing for the evening. I chose my outfit carefully, a midnight blue silk dress that Daniel had always said brought out my eyes, paired with the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 5th anniversary. If I was going to end my marriage, I was going to look magnificent doing it. I also made 2 final phone calls. The first was to Margaret Kim Daniel's mother. "Vivian, dear," she said warmly, "how are you feeling about the memorial presentation?" Margaret was the only person who knew about my Thursday evening plans, though she didn't know the full truth about why I was having dinner at Le Pigeon. She'd always been more of a mother to me than my own, especially after Claire died. "I'm ready, Margaret. But I need you to know something. Whatever happens after tonight, whatever you hear about Daniel and me, I want you to know that I love you. You've been family to me when I needed it most. Vivian," her voice grew concerned, "you're scaring me. What's happening tonight?" "Justice," I said simply. "Or maybe just truth. I'm not sure there's a difference anymore." "Does this have something to do with Daniel and that marketing director, Rachel?" I went very still. "What do you know?" Margaret sighed. "I'm a family therapist, dear. I see the signs. Daniel's been different lately. Distracted. Guilty. And I saw them together last month at a coffee shop downtown. The way they looked at each other." She trailed off. "I hoped I was wrong." "You weren't wrong." "Oh, Vivian, I'm so sorry. If my son has hurt you, he made his choices. Now I'm making mine. Margaret, I promise I'll explain everything soon. But tonight I just need to know you'll understand that I did what I had to do." "Always," she said fiercely. "Family loyalty doesn't excuse family failures. If Daniel has betrayed you, he'll have to answer for it." The second call was to Sophia Martinez, my lawyer. Everything is in place, Sophia assured me. The divorce papers are prepared, the business partnership dissolution documents are ready, and we've established the separate bank account in your name. Vivian, are you absolutely certain about this approach? Once you set this in motion, there's no going back, I finished. I know, but Sophia, some betrayals are so complete that they require complete responses. Half measures won't work here. Then I'll be standing by. Call me if you need anything tonight. At 7:15, I arrived at Le Pigeon. The restaurant sat in a renovated building in the East Burnside neighborhood, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, and carefully curated Portland charm. Through the windows, I could see the Willamette River reflecting the city lights, exactly the view Daniel had requested for his romantic dinner with my former best friend. The hostess, a elegant woman named Caroline, recognized me immediately. Daniel and I had been regular customers for years. "Mrs. Kim," she said warmly, "we have your table ready. I understand you're hosting a business consultation tonight." "Something like that," I said. "Caroline, in about 30 minutes, my husband will arrive with a young woman. They'll have a reservation under Daniel Kim. They'll believe they're having a private dinner for two. When they're seated, could you please escort Dr. Bennett to my table? He'll be asking for Vivian Harper." Caroline's expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught the flicker of understanding in her eyes. She'd probably seen this scenario play out before in various forms. "Of course, Mrs. Kim. We'll handle everything with complete discretion." She seated me at a corner table with perfect sightlines to the intimate booth where Daniel and Rachel would be dining. From here, I could observe without being immediately noticed. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was about to watch my marriage end from the same restaurant where it had truly begun 7 years ago. At exactly 8 o'clock, I watched Daniel enter the restaurant. He looked good. He was wearing the charcoal suit I'd bought him for his last birthday, the one that made his shoulders look broader. He moved with confidence, completely comfortable in this space that had always been ours. But tonight he was sharing it with someone else. Rachel arrived 5 minutes later. Seeing her in person was like being punched in the stomach with a fist made of memory and betrayal. She was still beautiful, more beautiful than I remembered, actually. Her blonde hair caught the light like honey. Her green eyes sparkled with the kind of confidence that comes from believing you're getting away with something. She wore a cream-colored dress that managed to be both elegant and subtly revealing. And yes, I could see it now, the slight roundness of her abdomen that her strategic clothing choices tried to hide. The pregnancy glow that made her skin luminous. She was probably 4 months along right around the time her affair with Daniel had become physical based on the text messages. I watched Daniel greet her with a kiss that lasted longer than any greeting between colleagues should. I watched him place his hand on her lower back as they were escorted to their booth. I watched them settle into their seats with the comfortable intimacy of lovers who'd done this many times before, and I felt nothing but that cold, clear certainty that I was doing the right thing. Dr. Thomas Bennett arrived 10 minutes later. I recognized him immediately from his photos, tall, distinguished with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had the sort of calm presence that made you understand why people trusted him with their deepest wounds. He was wearing a navy blazer and carrying a leather messenger bag, probably full of those research papers he'd mentioned. "Ms. Harper." He approached my table with a warm smile. "I'm Thomas Bennett. Thank you so much for inviting me to discuss your memorial project." I stood to shake his hand, noting the wedding ring on his finger, a simple gold band that probably matched the one Rachel was wearing right now, just a few tables away while she held hands with my husband. "Please call me Vivian, and thank you for making time for this. I hope you don't mind, but I've taken the liberty of ordering wine." "That's very thoughtful." Thomas settled into his chair, pulling out a notebook. "So tell me about this memorial. What makes it so personal that it requires 5 years to complete?" Before I could answer, his eyes drifted past me to the booth where Daniel and Rachel were sitting. I watched his face change confusion, then recognition, then the beginning of something that looked like fear. That's Rachel," he said slowly. "My wife. But I don't understand why she's here. She said she was visiting her mother in Seattle tonight." "Thomas," I said gently, "the woman your wife is with, that's my husband, Daniel Kim. They've been having an affair for approximately 8 months. The wine glass stopped halfway to his mouth. His face went pale, and I could see him struggling to process what I'd just said. "That's impossible," he managed finally. "Rachel is pregnant. We're having a baby. She's 4 months along." "I know," I said softly. But Thomas, based on the timeline of their affair, there's a very good chance that baby isn't yours. The silence that followed felt like the moment right before a building collapses, that split second when all the supports have failed, but gravity hasn't quite finished its work yet. How long have you known? Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 5 days. I found their text messages by accident. I've been planning this evening ever since. Planning, you mean you invited me here to... He looked toward the booth again, where Rachel was now feeding Daniel a bite of her appetizer, the intimate gesture like watching someone desecrate a sacred space. I invited you here because we both deserve the truth, I said, and because they deserve to face the consequences of their choices together, rather than hiding behind separate lies in separate homes. Thomas set down his wine glass very carefully. How can you be so calm? If this were me, I think I'd be... falling apart, screaming, breaking things. I smiled sadly. Trust me, I've considered all of those options. But Thomas, I'm an architect. I build things that last. Emotional reactions don't last. Carefully planned structures do. And right now I'm building the framework for all of us to move forward with honesty. What kind of framework did you have in mind? The truth, plain and simple, all 4 of us facing it together. Thomas looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. Vivian, he said quietly, thank you for giving me the chance to learn the truth instead of living a lie. That takes courage. Or maybe just exhaustion, I admitted. I'm tired of living in a world made of other people's deceptions. I caught Caroline's eye and nodded. It was time. As we approached Daniel and Rachel's booth, I watched their faces change in sequence. Confusion, recognition, horror. It was like watching a wave break each emotion, cresting into the next. Daniel saw me first. The laughter died on his face, replaced by an expression I'd never seen before, pure animal fear. Vivian, he stood slowly, his napkin falling forgotten to the floor. What are you doing here? Rachel turned to see what had captured his attention. When she saw me, her hand flew to her stomach in an unconscious protective gesture. Then her eyes moved to Thomas, and I watched her face drain of color. Hello, Daniel, I said, my voice steady. Hello, Rachel. I'd like you to meet Dr. Thomas Bennett. Thomas, this is my husband Daniel and his colleague Rachel. Though I suppose colleague isn't quite the right word, is it? The 4 of us stood frozen in a tableau that would have been comedic if it weren't so devastating. 2 betrayers. 2 betrayed all of us finally in the same room with nowhere to hide. Thomas, Rachel whispered. Her hand was still on her stomach, and I saw Thomas's eyes drawn to the gesture, watching his hopes for fatherhood crumble in real time. Rachel, Thomas said quietly, would you like to explain why you're having dinner with another woman's husband when you told me you were in Seattle visiting your mother? Thomas, I can explain. Rachel's voice was higher than normal, strained with panic. This is just a business dinner. We were discussing the expansion project. At Le Pigeon, I interrupted softly. At the same restaurant where I've celebrated every anniversary with my husband for the past 7 years. At a table set for lovers with wine, chosen specifically to pair with romantic intentions. Daniel found his voice, though it came out rough. Vivian, you don't understand the context here. Rachel and I were just having an affair, I finished for him. For 8 months. Planning a future together. Texting at all hours, booking hotel rooms, discussing how distant and difficult I've been while grieving my sister. I turned to Rachel, sharing my secrets with each other, using my trauma as justification for your betrayal. Rachel's face crumbled, tears already forming. Vivian, please, you have to understand. Actually, I don't. My voice was still calm, still controlled. I don't have to understand why my former best friend, the only person I ever trusted with the truth about Claire's death, decided that sleeping with my husband was somehow acceptable. I don't have to make sense of why you took the most painful thing I ever told you and weaponized it. Thomas spoke, his voice hollow. What truth about Claire's death? I kept my eyes on Rachel. The truth that I blame myself for my sister's accident, that I refused to drive her to the airport because I had an important meeting, that her car's brake line failed and she crashed because I chose my career over her safety. I told Rachel this in confidence and grief when I needed a friend, and she told Daniel. and they both decided that my guilt made me emotionally unavailable enough to justify their affair. Oh, God, Thomas whispered. He was looking at Rachel as if seeing her for the first time. Rachel, how could you? It wasn't like that, Rachel said desperately, but the tears were flowing freely now. Daniel and we connected in a way that I've never experienced before. The conversations, the understanding. The understanding, I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. Rachel, he's been lying to both of us. He told you he was in an unhappy marriage while telling me he was working late. He made you believe you were special while making me believe I was still his priority. What exactly does that demonstrate about his capacity for understanding? Daniel's face flushed with anger, or maybe shame. Vivian, you don't have the right to judge our relationship. You've been distant for months, obsessed with that memorial project, emotionally unavailable. So this is my fault, I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I was processing grief over my sister's death, trying to work through trauma and guilt, and that gave you permission to betray our marriage. That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said. You're just saying it more carefully now because we have witnesses. Caroline appeared beside our table, her professional composure intact, despite the drama unfolding. Excuse me, but several guests have expressed concern. Perhaps this conversation would be better held in our private dining room. Actually, I said I think we're fine right here. Truth should be public. Don't you think so, Rachel? You've always believed in radical honesty, or at least you used to back when we were friends. Rachel flinched as if I'd struck her. Vivian, I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen. Then what did you want? I leaned forward, genuinely curious. When you moved to Portland 18 months ago, when you applied for a job at the firm Daniel and I built together, when you started having lunch with my husband, and then dinner with my husband, and then hotel rooms with my husband, what were you hoping would happen? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. Thomas spoke instead, his voice steady, despite the pain I could see in his eyes. She wanted what she couldn't have 15 years ago. We all turned to look at him. What? Ooh, Daniel said. Thomas looked at Rachel, and there was something like pity in his expression. You were going to tell them eventually, weren't you? About the pregnancy, about what happened in grad school? Rachel's face went sheet white. Thomas, they deserve to know, Thomas said firmly. If we're doing truth, let's do all of it. He turned to me. Rachel and Daniel had a relationship in graduate school. Before you met him, Vivian, they were together for 2 years. She got pregnant. They were planning to get married. The restaurant seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the back of an empty chair to steady myself. And then she had a miscarriage, Thomas continued. It was late term, almost 5 months. They both grieved, but differently. Rachel wanted to try again immediately. Daniel wanted to wait to focus on finishing his degree. They fought. She left Portland without telling him where she was going. That's not, Rachel started. It's not the whole truth, Thomas agreed. Because the whole truth is that you didn't just leave. You disappeared completely. You changed your phone number, blocked him on everything, moved to San Francisco. You told me once that you'd had a toxic relationship in college, that you needed to escape. But it wasn't toxic, was it? You just couldn't handle that he didn't want to try for another baby right away. Daniel sank back into the booth, his face ashen. Rachel, I looked for you. For months. I tried to find you to apologize, to make sure you were okay. You didn't try hard enough. Rachel's voice broke, anger and grief pouring out together. I lost our baby Daniel. I lost our future. And you just wanted to focus on your thesis, like nothing had happened. That's not fair, Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Fair, Rachel laughed bitterly. What's fair about any of this? I spent 3 years in therapy trying to get over you. I married Thomas because he was kind and stable and the opposite of you in every way. I convinced myself I'd moved on. And then I saw your firm was hiring and I thought... She stopped, wiping her eyes. I thought maybe I could prove to myself that I was over it, that seeing you wouldn't hurt anymore. But it did hurt, I said softly, understanding dawning. So you decided to take him back, to finish what you started 15 years ago. Rachel looked at me, and for the first time I saw something other than fear in her eyes. I saw regret, real genuine regret. I didn't decide anything, she whispered. It just happened. We started talking about the old days, about what might have been. And then one night after a client dinner, we kissed, and it felt like coming home. Like the 15 years in between had been the lie, and this was the truth we were supposed to be living. But it wasn't the truth, Thomas said quietly. It was nostalgia. It was unfinished business, dressed up as destiny. He stood up, and I could see the effort it took for him to maintain his composure. Rachel, I want you to pack your things tonight. I'll stay with my brother. We'll need to discuss the baby and custody arrangements and all the practical matters. But right now, I just need you to know that I would have loved that child, whether it was mine or not. I would have raised them and protected them and given them the best life I could, because that's what I vowed to do when I married you. Thomas, Rachel reached for his hand, but he pulled away gently. But I can't stay married to someone who doesn't love me. And you don't, do you? You love the idea of what you and Daniel could have been. You love the fantasy of rewriting your past. But you don't love me, and you probably never did. The silence that followed was devastating. Rachel didn't deny it. She just stood there crying, one hand still on her pregnant belly, surrounded by the wreckage of what she'd done. I looked at Daniel, this man I'd loved and trusted for 12 years, and felt something unexpected compassion. Not forgiveness, I wasn't anywhere close to that. But I could see his pain now, his confusion, the way he was caught between two versions of his life and didn't know which one was real. Daniel, I sassy said, and he looked at me with something like hope in his eyes. I know you loved her first. I know you grieved for her and the baby you lost. I know that when she came back, it must have felt like a second chance. Vivian, I held up my hand. But you were married to me. For 12 years you were married to me. And instead of talking to me about feeling distant, instead of suggesting counseling or telling me the truth about your feelings, you built a secret life with someone else. You took my grief and my guilt and my trauma, and you used them as justification for betraying everything we built together. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. These are divorce papers. Our marriage is over effective immediately. I'm also dissolving our business partnership. My lawyer will be in touch about the details, but essentially I'm taking my clients and starting my own firm. Daniel stared at the envelope as if it might explode. Vivian, please. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can pretend this never happened, rebuild trust that you spent 8 months systematically destroying. I shook my head. Daniel, I would rather be alone and honest than married and deceived. I would rather start over from nothing than continue building on a foundation made of lies. And the firm, his voice cracked, everything we built together will be divided according to the partnership agreement you signed, which, if you remember, includes a morality clause that allows either partner to dissolve the business if the other engages in conduct detrimental to the company's reputation. I gestured toward Rachel, towards him. Having an affair with an employee definitely qualifies. Rachel had stopped crying. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like relief. Vivian, she said softly, I know you're angry. I know you have every right to hate me. But please, before you go, I need you to understand something. I don't think I need to understand anything more than I already do. Please. Rachel's voice broke. I came back to Portland to prove I was over Daniel. But what I was really trying to prove was that I was over myself, the version of me who couldn't handle loss, who ran away instead of dealing with pain. When Daniel and I started talking again, it felt like I could rewrite that story. I could be the girl who got her happy ending after all. She looked down at her pregnant belly. But somewhere along the way I realized something. I didn't want Daniel. I wanted the baby we lost. I wanted to go back into the moment before everything went wrong and make different choices. And when I got pregnant again, her voice caught. I thought maybe this was the universe giving me a do-over, but it's not. It's just another life I'm bringing into a situation built on lies. Thomas made a small sound, something between a sob and a laugh. At least you're finally being honest. Rachel turned to him. I'm so sorry, Thomas. You deserved so much better than this. You deserved a wife who loved you fully, not someone trying to use you to forget someone else. Yes, Thomas said simply. I did. He looked at me then, and I saw in his eyes the same thing I'd been feeling, the strange peace that comes from finally knowing the truth, even when the truth is terrible. Vivian, he said, thank you. For whatever it's worth, thank you for caring enough about truth to give me this. He gestured at the ruins of both our marriages. This clarity. "You're welcome," I said, though I'm not sure clarity is always a gift. "It is," he insisted, "because now I can stop wondering why my wife seems so distant. I can stop blaming myself for not being enough. I can start building a life based on what's real instead of what I hoped was real." I nodded, understanding completely. We stood there, 4 people whose lives had just been irrevocably changed in a restaurant full of strangers eating their Thursday night dinners, unaware that they were witnessing the demolition of 2 marriages. Caroline approached again, this time with the check. "Mrs. Kim, Dr. Bennett, your meals are complimentary tonight. I hope you both find peace." As Thomas and I walked toward the exit together, I heard Daniel call after me, "Vivian, please, I love you. I've always loved you." I turned back to look at him, really look at him one last time. "Daniel," I said, "if this is what you love looks like, I'm grateful I finally learned the difference between love and habit." Outside Le Pigeon, the Portland night was cool and clear. Thomas and I stood on the sidewalk, 2 people who'd just watched their lives implode, not quite sure what to do next. "Can I buy you a real drink?" Thomas asked. "Somewhere that isn't loaded with memories." "I should probably go home," I said. But even as I said it, I realized I didn't want to. Home was the loft I shared with Daniel, the space we'd built together, every corner, carrying the weight of 12 years that now felt like 12 years of slowly accumulating lies. Or, Thomas said gently, "You could come to a bar with a stranger who just found out his wife is carrying another man's baby. We could sit in neutral territory and process the worst night of our lives together." I looked at him, this kind man who'd just had his entire future ripped away, and made a decision. "Okay," I said, "but somewhere quiet. I don't think I can handle crowds right now." We walked in silence to a small wine bar on Burnside, the kind of place with dim lighting and discreet booths. Thomas ordered us both whiskey without asking if I wanted wine. Somehow he understood that wine was for romance and celebration. Whiskey was for surviving. "How are you so calm?" Thomas asked after his first sip. "If I were you, I think I'd be losing my mind." "I lost my mind 5 days ago when I first read those text messages," I admitted. "I spent an entire night sitting in the dark, cataloging every lie, every excuse, every time I thanked Daniel for giving me space to grieve, when really he was just making space for himself to cheat. By the time morning came, I'd gone through all the stages of grief and landed on something else." "What determination," I said. I was determined that this betrayal wouldn't destroy me, that I wouldn't let them turn me into a victim. So I planned tonight with the same precision I'd used to design a building, every element in place, every structure supporting the next. Thomas nodded slowly. "The memorial garden. That wasn't just about your consultation, was it?" "No, though everything I told you on the phone was true. I have been working on a memorial garden for Claire for 5 years. I just couldn't finish it because—" I paused, trying to find the words. "Because I couldn't forgive myself for her death, and I was using that guilt as a way to avoid dealing with my marriage." "You didn't cause her death, Vivian." "I know that intellectually, but emotionally," I shook my head. "I made a choice that day. I chose work over Claire's safety, and she died because of it. Or at least that's the story I've been telling myself." "What story will you tell yourself now?" The question stopped me. I took a sip of whiskey, feeling it burn down my throat, warming me from the inside. "I think," I said slowly, "I'll tell myself that people make choices with incomplete information all the time. That Claire chose to drive her car even though it was making strange noises. That Daniel chose to have an affair instead of working on our marriage. That Rachel chose to come back to Portland and pursue a man who was married to someone else. We all make choices, and sometimes those choices have terrible consequences, but that doesn't make us murderers or villains. It just makes us human." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Rachel told me she married me because I was stable, safe, the opposite of the chaos she felt with Daniel." "Did that hurt?" "Surprisingly, no, because I married her for similar reasons. After my previous relationship ended badly, I wanted someone who wouldn't challenge me too much. Someone who would fit neatly into the life I'd planned." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out building a marriage on convenience isn't much better than building one on lies." "At least now you know." "At least now I know," he agreed. We sat in comfortable silence, two strangers bound by betrayal drinking whiskey and processing the wreckage of our old lives. Vivian, Thomas said eventually, what Rachel said about the pregnancy, about it being a do-over for the baby she lost with Daniel. Do you think that's true? Does it matter? It matters to the child. If I'm going to help raise them, I need to understand what I'm walking into. I looked at him with new respect. You're still planning to help? A child didn't ask to be born into this mess, Thomas said firmly. Whether it's biologically mine or Daniel's, it deserves at least one parent who can act like an adult. Rachel clearly isn't ready to be a mother, not if she's still trying to relive her past. And Daniel? He trailed off. Daniel will probably try, I said honestly. He's not a monster. He's just weak. He makes choices based on what feels good in the moment rather than what's right in the long term. That's generous of you. Not generous, just accurate. I spent 12 years with him. I know who he is. I finished my whiskey. The question is whether Rachel knows who she is. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I checked into Hotel Lucia downtown, a boutique place where Daniel and I had never been, where every surface wasn't haunted by the ghost of our marriage. I texted Margaret to let her know I was safe, then turned off my phone and lay in the unfamiliar bed staring at the ceiling. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't thinking about Claire. I was thinking about myself, about the woman I'd become in the shadow of guilt and grief. The woman who'd been so busy punishing herself that she hadn't noticed her husband slipping away. The woman who'd built her entire identity around being a widow to her sister's memory. That woman was gone now. She died tonight at Le Pigeon, somewhere between the moment I saw Rachel's pregnant belly and the moment I handed Daniel the divorce papers. I didn't know yet who I would become instead, but for the first time in 5 years, I was curious to find out. Vivian Harper thought she understood loss until she discovered that betrayal has layers deeper than death. In the next part, we'll follow her as she excavates the full truth about Rachel's return to Portland, uncovers the secret that connects all three of them to a past none of them have fully confronted, and makes a discovery that will change everything she thought she knew about her sister's death. Because sometimes the memorial we build isn't for the person who died, it's for the person we were before we learned how much people can hide. If you're invested in Vivian's journey, please like and subscribe. Part 2 is coming, and I promise the truth goes deeper than any of them imagine. I woke up in the Hotel Lucia on Friday morning with the kind of clarity that only comes after you've demolished your entire life and survived the night. The October sunlight filtered through unfamiliar curtains. My phone, which I'd finally turned back on, showed 47 missed calls and 32 text messages. Most from Daniel, several from Margaret, a few from colleagues who'd somehow already heard rumors, and one from Thomas Bennett sent at 3:47 a.m. Thomas can't sleep. Keep thinking about what Rachel said about wanting a do-over. Made me realize I've been doing the same thing, building a life based on fear of repeating past mistakes instead of actually living. Thank you for tonight. However painful it was necessary, I hope you're okay. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I typed back, Vivian, I'm okay. Or I will be. Coffee sometime next week. I think we both need someone who understands what it's like to rebuild from rubble. His response came immediately, as if he'd been waiting. Thomas, I'd like that. Take care of yourself, Vivian. I set the phone down and went to the window. Portland stretched out below me, bridges arching over the Willamette Mount Hood snow-capped in the distance, the city waking up to a day that looked exactly like yesterday, except that nothing was the same. My marriage was over. My business partnership was dissolving. My former best friend was pregnant with what was probably my husband's child. And somewhere in the wreckage of all those facts, I was supposed to find a way forward. But first I needed to go home and face whatever Daniel had left for me. The loft was empty when I arrived at 9 a.m. Daniel had texted that he was staying with a friend to give me space. The friend was probably Rachel, though I doubted her husband was providing much hospitality at the moment. The space felt different now, sterile like a stage set for a life I'd only been pretending to live. I walked through rooms we'd decorated together, past furniture. We'd chosen photographs we'd framed. Every object was a small lie I'd believed. On the kitchen counter, Daniel had left a handwritten note. Viv, I know you don't want to hear from me right now. I know I have no right to ask for anything. But please, before you make any final decisions, can we talk? Really talk without an audience, without lawyers. You were right about everything last night. I did use your grief as an excuse. I did betray you in ways I'm only beginning to understand. But you were also wrong about one thing. I do love you. I've always loved you. She was unfinished business, a ghost from my past that I thought I'd laid to rest. When she came back, all that old grief came with her. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not even sure I can forgive myself. But I need you to know that what we had was real. The 12 years weren't a lie, even if the last 8 months were. Please, just one conversation. That's all I'm asking. Daniel, I read the note 3 times, then set it aside. He wanted to talk. He wanted me to understand his pain, his confusion, his unfinished business. He wanted me to see him as a complex person making difficult choices rather than a simple villain in the story of my betrayal. And maybe in time I would be able to do that. Maybe eventually I'd have enough distance to feel compassion for the man who'd loved 2 women and chosen to lie to both of them rather than face his own cowardice. But not today. Today I needed to understand something else. Something that had been nagging at me since last night when Rachel talked about coming back to Portland to prove she was over Daniel. I pulled out my laptop and started digging into the past. Rachel Morgan had left Portland 15 years ago in the spring of her final year of graduate school. She'd moved to San Francisco without telling anyone where she was going. Not her friends, not her professors, not Daniel. She'd simply disappeared. But people don't disappear without leaving traces, especially not in the digital age. I started with social media, but Rachel's online presence before 3 years ago was virtually non-existent. No Facebook posts, no Instagram photos, no LinkedIn updates. It was as if she'd deliberately scrubbed her digital footprint. So I went deeper. I called Sophia Martinez, my lawyer. Vivian, Sophia answered on the first ring. I heard about last night. Are you okay? I'm functional, I said. Sophia, I need you to do something for me that might be ethically gray. Those are my favorite kind of requests. I need to know where Rachel Morgan was for the 3 years after she left Portland. 2010 to 2013. She told people she had a toxic relationship she needed to escape, but I think there's more to it. Can you find hospital records? Therapy records. Anything that might explain where she went and why she stayed gone. Sophia was quiet for a moment. Vivian, are you sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes the answers we find are worse than the questions we started with. I need to know, I said firmly. Because last night Thomas said Rachel got pregnant in grad school and had a miscarriage at 5 months. But Rachel's reaction when he said it, Sophia, she looked terrified, like he'd exposed something she'd wanted to keep hidden. You think there's more to the story? I know there is. And I think whatever happened 15 years ago is the real reason she came back. Not for Daniel. For something else. All right, Sophia said. Give me 48 hours, and Vivian, be prepared. Whatever I find might change how you see everything. While I waited for Sophia's research, I turned my attention to the memorial garden. For 5 years, I'd been unable to finish Claire's design because I couldn't face what it represented: my guilt, my failure, the choice I'd made that had cost my sister her life. But standing in my empty studio looking at the plans spread across my drafting table, I realized something. The garden wasn't stuck because of guilt. It was stuck because I'd been designing the wrong memorial. I'd been trying to build a monument to my regret, a physical manifestation of I'm sorry, that would somehow absolve me of responsibility for Claire's death. But Claire didn't need my apologies. She was dead. She was beyond apologies. The memorial needed to be something else, something that honored who Claire had been, not who I'd failed to be for her. I pulled out a fresh sheet of drafting paper and started over. This time, instead of spiral pathways that led inward to a fountain of tears, I designed radiating paths that led outward to open spaces. Instead of weeping willows and somber stone benches, I chose Claire's favorite flowering cherry trees and benches positioned to catch the sunrise, because Claire had always been a morning person, always the first one awake, always ready to face the day with optimism I'd never quite managed. Instead of inscribing apologies in stone, I would inscribe her favorite quote, something she'd said to me the last time I'd seen her alive. Vivian, you can't save everyone. Sometimes you just have to let people make their own choices and trust that they'll be okay. She'd been talking about a client who'd rejected one of my designs. But looking back now, I wondered if she'd been talking about herself. About the choice she'd made to drive her car that day, even though it was making strange noises. About the choice I'd made to prioritize work over safety. We'd both made choices, and one of us had died because of them. But that didn't make me a murderer. It just made me human. For the first time in 5 years, tears came. Not guilty tears or angry tears, but the clean, simple tears of actual grief. I cried for my sister. I cried for the relationship we'd never get to have now that I was finally learning how to be the person she'd always believed I could be. And when the tears stopped, I kept designing. By Friday evening, I had a complete set of plans for Claire's memorial garden. It was beautiful. It was honest. It was exactly what she would have wanted. I picked up my phone and called Margaret. "Vivian, sweetheart," Margaret answered immediately. "I've been so worried. Are you all right?" "I'm better than all right," I said, surprising myself with how true it was. "Margaret, I finished Claire's memorial design. After 5 years, it's finally complete." "Oh, Vivian," I could hear the emotion in Margaret's voice. "That's wonderful. What changed?" I said simply. I stopped trying to build a monument to my guilt and started building a celebration of Claire's life. It turns out when you stop punishing yourself, creativity comes a lot easier. "I'm so proud of you." Margaret paused. Have you spoken to Daniel?" "No. He left me a note asking to talk, but I'm not ready. Maybe I won't ever be ready. Right now I just need to focus on moving forward." "That's very healthy," Margaret said, "and very mature. Though I have to tell you, Daniel has been calling me constantly. He's devastated, Vivian. Whatever else happened, I do believe he loves you." "I believe he thinks he does," I corrected gently. "But Margaret, love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice you make every day. And for 8 months, Daniel chose to lie to me. That's not love. That's cowardice wrapped in sentiment." Margaret sighed. "You're right, of course. I raised him better than this. I taught him that honesty was the foundation of any real relationship. Somewhere along the way, he forgot that lesson." "It's not your fault," I assured her. "We all make our own choices. Daniel made his. Now I'm making mine." After I hung up, I texted Sophia. "Any updates on the Rachel research?" Her response came quickly. "Found something. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? This isn't something I want to discuss over text." Saturday morning, I sat in Sophia's downtown office while rain drummed against the windows. She had a file folder in front of her unopened, and her expression was grave. "Before I show you this," Sophia said, "I need you to understand something. What I found, it's going to change how you see the entire situation. Once you know this, you can't unknow it." "Show me," I said. Sophia opened the folder and slid several documents across her desk. The first was a hospital record from San Francisco General Hospital, dated April 2010. Patient Rachel Morgan. Diagnosis: incomplete miscarriage at 22 weeks gestation. Complications: severe hemorrhaging requiring emergency surgery. Outcome: patient survived but sustained damage requiring partial hysterectomy. I stared at the medical terminology, my mind working to translate it into plain English. "She can't have children," I said slowly. "She couldn't," Sophia corrected. "After that miscarriage, Rachel was told she'd never be able to carry a pregnancy to term naturally. The damage was too severe. But she's pregnant now. Thomas said..." "That's where it gets complicated." Sophia slid across another document. This one was from a fertility clinic in Seattle, dated 18 months ago. Patient Rachel Morgan Bennett. Procedure: gestational surrogate consultation. I looked up at Sophia, not understanding. "Rachel and Thomas had been trying to have a baby for 3 years, Sophia explained. They'd gone through multiple rounds of IVF, all unsuccessful because of Rachel's uterine damage. So they decided to look into surrogacy. They found a gestational carrier, a woman who would carry their embryo." She slid across a third document. A surrogacy contract dated 14 months ago. Surrogate: Jennifer Hayes. Intended parents: Rachel Morgan Bennett and Thomas Bennett. "I don't understand," I said. "If Rachel can't have a children, then who?" And then I saw the fourth document. It was an email dated 6 months ago from Jennifer Hayes to Rachel Morgan Bennett. The subject line was, "I'm so sorry. Rachel, I don't know how to tell you this, but I can't continue with the surrogacy. My husband has been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He doesn't have much time, and I need to be with him and our children during his final months. I can't be pregnant right now. I know this destroys your plans. I know you've been waiting for this for so long. I'm so sorry. I've already transferred your deposit back to your account. Please forgive me. Jennifer, I looked up at Sophia, my mind racing. So Rachel isn't actually pregnant. Oh, she's pregnant, Sophia said. But it's not Thomas's baby, and it's not from a surrogate. She slid the final document across the desk. It was a prenatal record from a clinic in Portland dated 4 months ago. Patient Rachel Morgan Bennett. Gestational age 8 weeks. Notes. Patient reports unexpected natural pregnancy after years of infertility. Expressed shock and confusion about conception. Genetic testing recommended given patient's medical history. Natural pregnancy, I whispered, after being told she'd never be able to have children naturally. It's rare, but it happens, Sophia said. Sometimes years after damage, the body heals enough to support a pregnancy. But Vivian hears the part that matters, the timing. She pointed to the date on the prenatal record. This pregnancy started 4 months ago, which means Rachel got pregnant right around the time she started working at Harper and Associates, I finished. Right around the time she and Daniel started their affair. Exactly, which means this baby is almost certainly Daniel's. But here's what I find interesting. Rachel didn't tell Thomas she was pregnant until 3 months ago. She waited a full month after she found out. Why would she wait? That's the question, isn't it? Sophia leaned back in her chair. I did some more digging, called in a favor from a friend who works at the fertility clinic. Rachel came in for genetic testing 2 weeks after she found out she was pregnant. She wanted to know whose baby it was, Daniel's or Thomas's. My stomach sank. She was sleeping with both of them, apparently, and the genetic testing confirmed the baby was Daniel's. But here's where it gets really interesting. Sophia pulled out one more document, a bank statement showing a wire transfer from Rachel's account to Thomas's account dated 3 months ago. The amount $47,000. What is this? That's the money Thomas and Rachel had saved for the surrogacy, Sophia explained. After their surrogate backed out, they had all this money set aside for a baby that wasn't going to happen. And then Rachel got pregnant naturally with Daniel's baby. She should have been devastated that it wasn't Thomas's child. Instead, 3 months ago, she transferred half the surrogacy savings to Thomas's personal account. A divorce payment, I said slowly. She was planning to leave him. She was preparing him financially for when she told him the truth. That's my read too. But then something changed. She didn't leave. She kept the pregnancy secret from Daniel, let Thomas believe the baby might be his, and continued the affair while preparing for what I'm not sure. I sat back trying to process all of this information. Rachel couldn't have children naturally until suddenly she could. She'd gotten pregnant with Daniel's baby but hadn't told him. She'd started preparing Thomas for a divorce but hadn't gone through with it. She'd been sleeping with both men, lying to both men, and somehow thought she could maintain this precarious balance indefinitely. Why? I asked out loud. Why would she do this if she wanted to be with Daniel? Why not just leave Thomas? If she wanted to stay with Thomas, why have an affair with Daniel? I think, Sophia said carefully, that Rachel didn't want either of them. I think what she wanted was the baby. The baby she lost 15 years ago, the baby she'd been told she could never have again. This pregnancy isn't about Daniel or Thomas. It's about Rachel getting back what she thinks she lost. I thought about what Rachel had said last night at Le Pigeon. I didn't want Daniel. I wanted the baby we lost. I wanted to go back to the moment before everything went wrong. She'd been telling the truth. The affair, the lies, the elaborate deception, none of it was about love. It was about a woman so desperate to undo the past that she'd sacrifice the present to do it. There's one more thing, Sophia said quietly. She pulled out a final document, a therapy intake form from a clinic in San Francisco dated 2011. Patient Rachel Morgan, presenting issues, complicated grief. PTSD from medical trauma, obsessive thoughts about reversing past mistakes. In the therapist's notes, one line stood out. Patient expresses belief that she killed her baby by choosing to carry pregnancy despite medical advice to terminate due to complications. Reports intrusive thoughts about getting a second chance to make things right. Risk assessment moderate to high for self-destructive behavior in pursuit of pregnancy. I felt something cold settle in my chest. She was told to terminate the pregnancy, I said. 15 years ago when she was pregnant with Daniel's baby. The doctors told her it wasn't safe to continue, and she did anyway. That's why she nearly died. That's why she lost everything. And now, Sophia said, she's pregnant again against all odds. To her, this probably feels like destiny, like the universe giving her the do-over she's been obsessing about for 15 years. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the rainy Portland morning. Somewhere out there, Rachel was carrying a baby conceived from an affair, a baby she'd lied about to 2 different men, a baby she probably saw as her redemption for a choice she made 15 years ago. And I'd thought my guilt about Claire was complicated. What do I do with this information? I asked Sophia. That depends. What do you want to do? I turned to face her. I want to understand. I want to know why Rachel chose to come back to Portland, why she pursued Daniel, why she's done all of this. Because I don't think it's just about the baby. There's something else. Something I'm missing. You could talk to her, Sophia suggested. Directly, without Daniel, without Thomas, just the 2 of you. And say what hi. Remember when you were my best friend and I told you I felt responsible for my sister's death? Well, I've been thinking about how you feel responsible for your baby's death, and I'm wondering if we're both just broken people trying to punish ourselves in different ways. Sophia smiled slightly. That's actually not a bad opening. I called Rachel from Sophia's office. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious. Vivian, we need to talk, I said. Just you and me. No husbands, no lawyers, no audience. Coffee tomorrow morning. There was a long pause. Then, why? Because I think we're both carrying things we don't need to carry anymore. And I think maybe we can help each other put them down. Another pause. Okay, Rachel said finally, but not coffee. Can we meet at Claire's grave? The request surprised me. Why there? Because that's where this really started. 5 years ago when you told me you blamed yourself for her death. I need to tell you something about that night, Vivian. Something I should have told you then. Sunday morning I drove to Lone Fir Cemetery. The October rain had cleared, leaving the world washed clean and sharp-edged. Rachel was already there when I arrived, standing in front of Claire's headstone, one hand on her pregnant belly. She looked smaller than she had 2 nights ago at Le Pigeon. More vulnerable, less like the confident woman who'd stolen my husband, and more like the friend I'd known in college, the one who'd held me while I cried, who'd listened to my confession about Claire, who'd promised me that guilt and responsibility weren't always the same thing. Hi, she said quietly as I approached. Hi. We stood side by side for a moment, both looking at Claire's name carved in stone. Finally, Rachel spoke. That night 5 years ago, when you told me you'd killed Claire by not driving her to the airport, I told you that you didn't kill her, that you'd made a choice based on incomplete information. I remember. I lied. Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. I mean, what I said was technically true, you didn't kill her, but I let you believe something that wasn't entirely accurate. I turned to look at her. What do you mean? Rachel took a deep breath. Claire called me that morning too, before she called you. She asked me to drive her to the airport because her car was making noise. I said no. I had a meeting with a potential client, a big account I'd been chasing for months. I told her to just take her car, that it was probably nothing, that I'd make it up to her later. The world tilted slightly. You told her to drive the car. We both did, Rachel said, and there were tears streaming down her face now. You said no because of your museum board meeting. I said no because of my client pitch. She called both her big sisters her blood sister and her chosen sister, and we both chose work over her safety. If you're guilty, Vivian, then so am I. We killed her together. I couldn't breathe. For 5 years I'd been carrying this guilt alone, believing I was the only one who'd failed Claire. But Rachel had been there too, making the same choice, living with the same weight. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. That night when I confessed to you, why didn't you tell me you'd done the same thing? Because I was a coward, Rachel said simply. Because it was easier to comfort you than to admit my own guilt. Because if I told you, we'd both have to carry it, and I couldn't handle that. So I let you carry it alone, and I pretended I was blameless. She turned to face me fully. And then I left. I left Portland, left you disappeared for 3 years. Everyone thought it was because of Daniel and the miscarriage. But that was only part of it. I left because every time I looked at you, I saw Claire. I saw the guilt I was hiding. I saw the friend I was betraying by keeping silent. "So you came back," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "You came back to Portland 18 months ago, and you saw that I was still carrying the guilt, still blaming myself, still building my entire identity around having failed Claire. And you felt guilty about that too." "Yes," Rachel whispered. "I felt guilty that I'd let you suffer alone, guilty that I'd never told you the truth, guilty that I'd abandoned you when you needed me most. And somewhere in that guilt, I convinced myself that if I could just fix things with Daniel, if I could complete that unfinished business from 15 years ago, then maybe I could fix everything else too. But you can't fix the past," I said. "You can only make peace with it." "I know that now." Rachel looked down at her pregnant belly. "This baby god Vivian, when I found out I was pregnant naturally after years of being told it was impossible, I thought it was a sign. I thought the universe was giving me back what I'd lost. The baby with Daniel that died. The friendship with you that I destroyed. Everything. But it's not a sign," I said gently. "It's just biology. Your body healed enough to support a pregnancy. That's medicine, not destiny." "I know," Rachel said again. "But I wanted it to be destiny so badly. I wanted to believe that all the pain and guilt and mistakes could be erased if I just got this one thing right." We stood in silence for a moment, two women who'd both failed the same person, who'd both spent years running from guilt in different directions, who'd both believed that if they just worked hard enough, or loved hard enough, or suffered hard enough, they could somehow undo what couldn't be undone. "Rachel," I said finally, "I forgive you. For not telling me about Claire, for the affair with Daniel, for all of it. Not because you deserve forgiveness, I'm not sure either of us deserves anything, but because I'm tired of carrying anger on top of guilt. I'm tired of building my life around what I should have done instead of what I can do now." Rachel started sobbing, then deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I slept with your husband, Vivian. I used your secrets against you. I'm carrying his baby. How can you possibly forgive me?" "Because Claire would have," I said simply. "Because my sister believed in second chances and fresh starts and not letting past mistakes define your future. And because honestly, Rachel, I think we've both punished ourselves enough." I reached out and took her hand, placing it on Claire's headstone. Then I placed my own hand over hers. "Claire," I said out loud, "Rachel and I both made choices that contributed to your death. We both said no when you needed us. We both chose work over your safety. We both loved you and failed you in the same moment. And we're both sorry. So sorry. But we can't change what happened. All we can do is promise to make different choices going forward." Rachel was crying too hard to speak, so I continued. "I promise to stop punishing myself for being human. I promise to finish your memorial garden, the real one, the one that celebrates who you were instead of memorializing my guilt. I promise to live the life you didn't get to live and to make choices based on love instead of fear." I looked at Rachel. "Your turn." Rachel took a shaky breath. "I promise to tell Thomas the truth about everything. About the baby, about my guilt over Claire, about why I really came back to Portland. I promise to stop trying to fix the past by destroying the present. And I promise to be the kind of mother this baby deserves, one who's honest about her mistakes instead of running from them." We stood there, hands joined on Claire's headstone, crying together for the first time in 5 years. "Do you think she forgives us?" Rachel asked finally. "I think I said that Claire forgave us the moment she died. It's ourselves we need to forgive." Rachel and I talked for 2 more hours, sitting on the wet grass beside Claire's grave, finally telling each other the truth about everything. She told me about the miscarriage, how she'd hemorrhaged so badly that the doctors said she wouldn't survive the night. How Daniel had stayed with her through the surgery, but had struggled to cope with the aftermath. How she'd wanted to try for another baby immediately, while Daniel had wanted to wait and focus on healing. How they'd fought, and how she'd left without saying goodbye, because she couldn't bear to see the relief in his eyes when she said she was going. She told me about the 3 years in San Francisco where she'd worked 70-hour weeks at a tech startup trying to outrun her grief, about the therapy that helped her understand she'd been using pregnancy as a way to prove she deserved love, about meeting Thomas at a psychology conference and thinking he represented a clean slate, A man who didn't know about her past, who could love her without all that baggage. And she told me about coming back to Portland, seeing the job posting for Harper and Associates, and making the impulsive decision to apply. About how she'd told herself it was just curiosity, just wanting to see if she could handle being in the same city as Daniel. About how that first meeting had cracked open everything she thought she'd healed. In return, I told her about the 5 years after Claire died. About how the guilt had made me disappear into work, had made me distant with Daniel, had made me unable to connect with anyone because I was too busy punishing myself. About how I'd designed memorial after memorial for other people's grief because I couldn't face my own. About how in a twisted way Daniel's affair had actually saved me because it had forced me to stop looking backward and start looking forward. "So what happens now?" Rachel asked as the afternoon shadows grew long. "Now we both start over," I said. "You have a baby to prepare for, decisions to make about Thomas and Daniel, a life to build that's based on truth instead of fantasy. And you, I have a memorial to finish, a business to start, a version of myself to discover that isn't defined by guilt or betrayal." I paused. "And maybe eventually coffee with Thomas Bennett. He seems like someone who understands what it means to rebuild from ruins." Rachel smiled slightly. "He is. He's a good man, Vivian. Better than either of us deserved." "Maybe that's the point," I said. "Maybe we don't get what we deserve. We just get what we get, and then we have to decide what to do with it." As we walked back to our cars, Rachel stopped and turned to me. "Vivian, thank you for giving me the chance to tell the truth. I know it doesn't fix anything, but it's a start," I finished. "That's all any of us can do. Start, Jan." That night I sat in my hotel room and finally responded to Daniel's note. "Daniel, you asked for a conversation. I can't give you that yet, maybe not ever, but I can give you this. I understand now that our marriage ended long before I found those text messages. It ended when you chose to lie instead of telling me you were struggling. It ended when I chose to hide in grief instead of being present in our partnership. We both failed each other in different ways for different reasons." Rachel told me something today that changes how I see everything. She told me she also refused to drive Claire to the airport that morning, that we both made the same choice, and Claire died because of it. For 5 years, I've been carrying guilt that should have been shared, and you used that isolated guilt to justify betraying me. But here's what I've learned: guilt and love aren't the same thing. You can love someone and still hurt them. You can feel guilty and still deserve forgiveness. And you can end a marriage and still honor what it was before it broke. I loved you, Daniel. For 12 years, I loved you completely. That love was real, even if it wasn't enough to survive your choices. But I can't rebuild a marriage on a foundation of lies. And I can't spend the rest of my life wondering if you're being honest or just performing honesty. So this is goodbye. Not because I hate you, but because I finally love myself enough to walk away. The divorce papers are with Sophia. Please sign them. Vivian, I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I opened a new document and started writing a proposal for Rodriguez Design Studio, the firm I would build alone from scratch, based entirely on my own vision. For the first time in 5 years, I was excited about the future. 6 months after the night that destroyed 2 marriages, I stood in the construction site that would become Harper Design Studio, watching workers install the final panels of glass that would form the walls of Claire's memorial garden. It was April now. The Portland cherry trees were in full bloom, dropping petals like pink snow, and the air smelled of rain and new beginnings. Mount Hood stood clear and sharp against a blue sky that felt like a promise. "Ms. Harper." The construction foreman approached, holding blueprints protected by plastic sheeting. "We need your sign-off on the fountain placement. The soil composition is slightly different than we expected." I studied the plans, making minute adjustments with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent months refining every detail. This garden wasn't just a memorial anymore. It was proof that beauty could rise from guilt, that structure could emerge from chaos, that you could build something lasting even after everything fell apart. "Move it 3 feet east," I decided. "The morning light will hit the water better from that angle." Claire was always a morning person. The foreman nodded and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The past 6 months had been a masterclass in demolition and reconstruction. The divorce from Daniel had been finalized in January swift and surprisingly amicable once he realized I wasn't going to change my mind. The business dissolution had been more complex, dividing clients' assets, intellectual property, but Sophia had negotiated terms that left me with enough to start fresh, and Daniel with enough to survive his own rebuilding. Harper Design Studio had opened in February, operating out of a converted warehouse in the Pearl District. The space was mine alone. No shared history, no ghosts, just clean lines and empty rooms waiting to be filled with new work, new clients, new versions of success that didn't require me to sacrifice myself to achieve them. My first major commission was Claire's Memorial Garden. My second was a meditation pavilion for a cancer survivor who'd lost her daughter. My third was a library renovation for a school where books would line walls inscribed with quotes about resilience and hope. I was building spaces that helped people process loss and find beauty on the other side of it. And in the process, I was finally processing my own. My phone buzzed. A text from Thomas Bennett. Thomas, coffee this afternoon. I have news about the custody arrangements. Over the past 6 months, Thomas and I had maintained a careful friendship, two people who'd been betrayed in the same spectacular way, learning to trust again by taking things slowly. We met for coffee every few weeks, sharing updates about our respective legal proceedings and the strange new lives we were building from scratch. Vivian, the usual place at 3, Thomas perfect. And Vivian, thank you again for recommending Dr. Kim as my therapist. She's been incredibly helpful. Dr. Margaret Kim Daniels' mother, and ironically one of Portland's most respected family therapists. When Thomas had mentioned struggling with the psychological aftermath of Rachel's betrayal, I'd recommended Margaret without hesitation. The fact that she was my ex-mother-in-law had initially seemed awkward, but Margaret had insisted that helping Thomas was her way of making amends for her son's behavior. Family loyalty doesn't excuse family failures, she'd told me over tea one afternoon. Daniel is my son and I'll always love him, but what he did was wrong. If I can help repair some of the damage he caused, I consider that my responsibility. Margaret had become one of my closest confidants over these months. She and I had lunch once a week, during which she never made excuses for Daniel, but always asked how I was healing. She'd been the one to encourage me to finish Claire's memorial, to take the leap, and start my own firm, to allow myself to imagine a future that didn't revolve around past wounds. Vivian, Margaret is the best. See you at 3. I pocketed my phone and walked the perimeter of the memorial garden one more time, checking sightlines and shadow patterns. In 2 weeks, we'd have the dedication ceremony. The space would be open to the public, a place where anyone carrying grief could come and sit among flowering trees, listen to water music from the fountain, and remember that loss doesn't have to mean the end of beauty. The central fountain featured a sculpture I'd commissioned from a local artist, 2 hands reaching toward each other, but not quite touching. The gap between them represented all the things we can't undo, all the moments we can't get back, all the people we've loved and lost and failed. But the reaching meant we'd tried, that we'd cared enough to extend ourselves even when we knew we might fall short. Beneath the sculpture, I'd inscribed Claire's quote, "You can't save everyone. Sometimes you just have to let people make their own choices and trust that they'll be okay." And beneath that, in smaller letters, an addition I'd made. And when you can't save them, you have to forgive yourself for being human. At 3 o'clock, I found Thomas at our usual table in the corner of Coava Coffee on Burnside. He looked better than he had in months. The haunted expression was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. He was wearing jeans and a navy sweater instead of his usual professional attire, and his hair was slightly longer, less rigidly styled. He looked like a man who'd stopped performing competence and started actually living. "You look good," I said, settling into my chair with a latte. "I feel good," Thomas admitted. "Better than I have since before I married Rachel, if I'm being honest. Dr. Kim helped me realize something important this week." "What's that?" "That being betrayed doesn't make me weak or foolish. It makes me human, and humans deserve better than living with people who lie to them." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. "That's very wise. And the custody arrangements," Thomas's expression shifted, not quite sad, but complicated. "The paternity test results came back yesterday. The baby isn't mine." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry, Thomas. I know you were hoping—" "Actually," he interrupted, "I'm relieved." I blinked, surprised. Relieved. I spent months wondering if I could love a child conceived through Rachel's affair with Daniel. Whether I could look at that baby and not see betrayal. Now I don't have to find out. He took a sip of his coffee. Daniel will have to step up and be a father, and I can focus on building a life that's actually mine without being tied to Rachel through a child for the next 18 years. How is Rachel handling it? About as well as you'd expect. She's living with her parents in Eugene now. Apparently Daniel's trying to be involved, but it's, Thomas shrugged, complicated. His firm is struggling financially. The scandal of our very public confrontation cost him several major clients. He's trying to rebuild, but it's slow going. I felt a pang of something not quite guilt, not quite sympathy. Just the acknowledgement that actions have consequences, and Daniel was finally facing his. And the baby, I asked. How far along is Rachel now? 7 months. She's due in June. She's asked me if I'd be willing to be part of the child's life, not as a father, but as... He paused, searching for the right words. As someone who cares. She said she doesn't want the baby to grow up thinking all men are liars or that love always comes with conditions. That's surprisingly self-aware of her. She's been in therapy too. Intensive therapy, actually. After our conversation at Le Pigeon, she checked herself into a treatment program that specializes in complicated grief and obsessive behavior. She's been there for 4 months. I absorbed this information slowly. Rachel in treatment. Rachel acknowledging that her behavior wasn't just about Daniel or the baby, but about deeper patterns that needed professional intervention. How do you feel about being in the baby's life? I asked. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if it held answers. I made a vow when I married Rachel. I promised to be there in sickness and health, good times and bad. The marriage is over. I can't stay with someone who doesn't love me. But the child. The child didn't ask to be born into this mess. If I can provide some stability, some example of what healthy masculinity looks like, then maybe some good can come from all this pain. I looked at this man across the table, this kind, thoughtful man who'd been devastated by betrayal and had somehow emerged with his capacity for compassion intact, and felt something shift in my chest. Not romantic love, not yet, but the beginning of something that might with time and honesty grow into it. You're remarkable, you know that, I said softly. Thomas met my eyes, and there was a vulnerability there that took my breath away. I'm just trying to be the kind of person I can respect. After Rachel, after learning how easily I'd been deceived, I needed to figure out what my values actually were. Turns out they include showing up for innocent children even when it's inconvenient. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the coffee shop humming with afternoon conversations around us. Vivian, Thomas said suddenly, I have something else to tell you, something that might change how you feel about our friendship. My stomach tightened. What is it? I've been offered a position at Stanford, department head for their new childhood trauma center. It's an incredible opportunity, the kind of thing I never thought I'd be considered for. Thomas, that's amazing. I said, genuinely happy for him, even as I felt something like loss settling in my chest. You have to take it. I haven't accepted yet. Why not? He looked at me steadily. Because these past 6 months, getting to know you, learning to be friends with someone who understands what betrayal costs. Vivian, you've helped me remember what it feels like to trust someone completely. And I don't want to move across 3 states without knowing if there's any possibility of us becoming more than friends. The coffee shop seemed to go quiet, though I knew it was just my perception narrowing to this moment, this conversation, this man offering me something I wasn't sure I was ready to accept. Thomas, I started, then stopped. What did I want to say? That I cared about him? I did. That I was attracted to him? I was. That I could imagine building something real with someone who valued honesty as much as I did? Absolutely. But was I ready? I care about you, I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. More than I probably should, given how we met and everything that's happened. But Thomas, I'm not sure I'm ready for more. I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not half of a couple built on lies. I understand, he said gently. And I wouldn't want you to be ready before you actually are. But Vivian, would you be willing to try? To see if what we have could grow into something real. Not now, not immediately. But eventually, before I could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Margaret. I'm sorry, I said to Thomas. Margaret never calls unless it's important. Take it, he said. I'll get us refills, I answered. Margaret, Vivian dear. Her voice was strained, which was unusual. Margaret was always composed. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I thought you should know. Daniel is in the hospital. My blood ran cold. What happened? He was in a car accident this morning. Nothing life-threatening, some bruises, possible concussion. But Vivian, he was on his way to your studio when it happened. He'd been calling me all week saying he needed to see you, that he'd made a terrible mistake about something. I told him to leave you alone, that you'd made your boundaries clear, but he was insistent. I closed my eyes. Even now, even after everything, Daniel couldn't let go, couldn't accept that our story was over. Is he okay? I asked, because despite everything, I didn't want him to suffer. Physically, yes. Emotionally, Margaret sighed. He's been asking for you. I told him it wasn't appropriate, but he's quite persistent. He says he needs to apologize to you properly, that there's something he should have told you months ago. I looked across the cafe at Thomas, who was watching me with concern. Here was a man who offered stability, honesty, the possibility of a love built on solid ground. And somewhere in a hospital bed was my ex-husband, broken and alone, still trying to pull me back into his orbit. Margaret, I said firmly, my responsibility to Daniel ended the night we signed the divorce papers. If he's having regrets, that's something he needs to work through on his own or with a therapist. I won't be pulled back into his drama. You're absolutely right, dear. I just thought you should know. She paused. There's something else. Rachel left the treatment center against medical advice. She's 7 months pregnant and apparently having contractions. They think it might be preterm labor. She won't go to the hospital unless Daniel is there, and Daniel won't leave the hospital where he is unless he talks to you first. It was manipulation, I realized. Even now, they were both trying to use me as the solution to their problems. Daniel needed me to absolve him so he could go be with Rachel. Rachel needed Daniel so she could have her baby. And I was supposed to somehow make all of this okay. No, I said simply. What about? No, I won't be manipulated into seeing Daniel. I won't be the person who makes their dysfunction functional. Rachel needs medical care. She should call 911 or her parents. Daniel needs to accept that our relationship is over. And I need to live my life without being responsible for managing everyone else's crises. There was a long pause. Then Margaret laughed, a real, genuine laugh. Oh, Vivian, I am so proud of you. That's exactly what I would have told my clients to do. I just needed to hear you say it. You were testing me. Not testing. Just, making sure you'd internalize the boundaries we've been working on. And you have. You've come so far, sweetheart. After I hung up, Thomas returned with fresh lattes and a concerned expression. Everything okay? Everything is exactly as it should be, I said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. Thomas, about your question earlier. About us. Yes. I'm not ready for promises or declarations or anything that feels too heavy, but I am ready to try. To see what might grow between us if we're patient with it. And if you take that Stanford position— I'm not taking it, he interrupted. Thomas. I already turned it down this morning, before I came to meet you. He smiled. Portland is growing on me. The rain, the food carts, the ridiculously earnest devotion to keeping things weird. But mostly it's growing on me because you're here. And I'd like to see where this goes, Vivian. Slowly, honestly. With no games and no hidden agendas. His hand was on the table between us. I reached out and took it, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steadiness of his grip. Okay, I said, let's try. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday in late April, over 200 people gathered for the dedication of Claire's Memorial Garden. The Portland sky was doing its typical spring schizophrenia sunshine, and rain clouds competing for dominance, creating that luminous quality of light that makes everything look like it's been painted by an impressionist. The cherry trees were at peak bloom, their pink petals drifting down like benedictions. I stood at the entrance to the garden, watching people file in, former clients, colleagues, friends from college, members of the architecture community. Margaret was there, of course, in an elegant navy dress. Thomas stood beside her, having helped set up chairs and sound equipment that morning. Rachel was there too, heavily pregnant, and moving slowly, her parents flanking her protectively. We'd exchanged emails in the weeks before, tentative, careful messages where she'd asked if it would be okay for her to attend. I'd said yes because this garden wasn't about holding grudges. It was about letting go. Daniel wasn't there. He'd sent a card through Margaret expressing his happiness for my success and his regret that he couldn't celebrate it with me. I'd read it once, then filed it away. Some chapters closed completely, some doors locked behind you. That was okay. The ceremony began at 2 p.m. with Sophia introducing me as an architect who understands that the most important structures we build are the ones that help us process what we can't change. I stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the gathered crowd at the garden I'd finally been able to complete at the fountain with its sculpture of reaching hands. 5 years ago, I began, my sister Claire died in a car accident that I blamed myself for. I spent those 5 years designing this memorial, trying to build something beautiful enough to make up for my failure, but I couldn't finish it. Every time I tried, I got stuck because I was designing the wrong thing. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I was trying to build a monument to guilt, a structure that would somehow prove I was sorry enough, that I'd suffered enough, that I deserved forgiveness for being human and making a human mistake. But Claire didn't need my guilt. She needs to be remembered for who she was, not for how she died. I gestured to the garden around us. So this is what I built instead. A space that celebrates Claire's love of mornings and cherry blossoms and sitting quietly with your thoughts. A place where anyone carrying loss can come and remember that grief and beauty can coexist, that you can honor someone's memory without being destroyed by their absence. My voice caught, but I pushed through. Claire used to tell me you can't save everyone. Sometimes you just have to let people make their own choices and trust that they'll be okay. She was talking about other people, but I think she was also giving me permission to let her go. To accept that her death wasn't my failure, it was just the sad, inevitable result of a series of choices that none of us could have predicted would end the way they did. I looked at Rachel, who was crying silently. All of us make choices. Some of them have terrible consequences. Some of them hurt people we love, but we can't undo the past. We can only decide what we build from its ruins. I took a breath. This garden is what I built. It's not perfect. The fountain is slightly off-center because the soil wasn't what we expected. The pathways curve in ways I didn't originally design because the trees needed more root space. The benches face directions I hadn't planned because that's where the morning light actually falls. But it's real. It's honest. It's built on what actually is instead of what I wished things could be. And I think Claire would have loved it. The crowd applauded, and I stepped away from the microphone feeling lighter than I had in 5 years. Thomas found me afterwards as people wandered through the garden, reading the inscribed quotes, sitting on benches, listening to the fountain's music. "That was beautiful," he said softly. "The speech, the garden, all of it." "Thank you for being here," I said, "for helping me believe I could actually finish this." "You did this yourself, Vivian. I just reminded you that you were capable of it." We walked together along one of the curving pathways past flowering cherry trees that scattered petals with every breeze. Other people were finding their own spots to sit and reflect, some crying, some smiling, some just sitting in quiet contemplation. "Vivian," Thomas said as we reached the fountain, "do you remember what you said at the coffee shop about not being sure you were ready for more?" "I remember. Are you any closer to knowing?" I looked at him, really looked at him, at the kindness in his eyes, the steadiness of his presence, the way he'd shown up for Rachel's baby even after everything she'd done, the way he'd shown up for me week after week with no agenda except friendship and the hope that friendship might grow into something deeper. "I'm closer," I said honestly. "I'm not all the way there yet. But Thomas, I think I'm learning something important. You don't have to have all the answers before you start building. You just have to be willing to adjust the design as you discover what the foundation can actually support." He smiled understanding immediately. "So we keep building slowly. We keep being honest. We keep adjusting as we learn what works and what doesn't." "Exactly." He took my hand and we stood together beside the fountain watching the water catch sunlight and throw rainbows. "I can do slow," Thomas said. "I can do honest. And Vivian, I can do patient because I think what we're building together is worth waiting for." Rachel approached as the ceremony was winding down, moving carefully, one hand on her swollen belly. Her parents hovered nearby, protective and watchful. "Vivian," she said softly, "can we talk just for a minute?" I nodded to Thomas, who gave my hand a quick squeeze and walked away to give us privacy. Rachel and I stood together looking at the fountain, at the reaching hands that would never quite touch. "The garden is beautiful," Rachel said. "Claire would have loved it." "Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy. I needed to be here." She looked down at her belly. "This baby, your niece or nephew technically since it's Daniel's, I want them to know about Claire, about you, about what it means to learn from your mistakes instead of being destroyed by them. You've been doing the work, I observed. The therapy, the treatment program, that takes courage. It takes desperation, Rachel corrected. After that night at Le Pigeon, after talking to you at Claire's grave, I realized I had two choices: keep running from my past or finally deal with it. I chose to deal with it because I didn't want this baby to inherit my dysfunction. She touched her belly protectively. I'm not going to be a perfect mother. I'm probably going to make a lot of mistakes. But I'm going to be honest about them. I'm going to teach this child that people are complicated, that love is complicated, and that the only way through pain is straight through the middle of it. That's all any of us can do, I said. Daniel wants to be involved, Rachel continued. He's trying to rebuild his firm, trying to figure out how to be a father, trying to make amends for the mess he made. I don't know if we'll end up together. Honestly, I don't think we should. We're better at fantasy than reality. But we're going to co-parent, and we're going to do it honestly, and maybe that's enough. Maybe it is. Rachel looked at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Peace. Not happiness, not joy, but the quiet acceptance that comes from finally facing truth. Vivian, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything from you, but I want you to know whatever relationship you build with this baby, if you want one at all, I'll support it. You're their aunt. You have a right to be part of their life if that's something you want. The offer surprised me. I hadn't thought about what it would mean to be an aunt to Daniel's child, to Rachel's child, to this baby conceived from betrayal, but innocent of it. I don't know what I want yet, I admitted. But thank you for offering. And Rachel, I hope you find peace. Real peace, not just the absence of chaos. You too, Rachel said. She started to walk away, then turned back. Vivian, I'm sorry. For all of it. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it one more time. I know, I said. And Rachel, I hope you learn to forgive yourself the way I'm learning to forgive myself. Because we both deserve that. And as the sun set over Portland, casting long shadows through the cherry trees, I sat alone in Claire's memorial garden. Everyone had gone home. Thomas had offered to stay, but I'd told him I needed some time alone with my thoughts. The fountain burbled softly, the water catching the last of the evening light. Birds settled into trees for the night. Somewhere in the distance, the city hummed with its usual chaos, cars and voices, and the sound of life continuing, whether you're ready or not. Well, Hermana, I said to Claire, to the garden, to the air, I finally did it. I finally built something worthy of you. The breeze rustled through the cherry trees, sending down a shower of pink petals that landed on my shoulders like blessings. I'm sorry it took me so long. I'm sorry I spent 5 years being angry at myself instead of honoring who you were. I'm sorry I chose work over driving you to the airport that day. I'm sorry for all of it. More petals fell and I caught one in my palm. But I'm learning something, Claire. I'm learning that sorry isn't enough. That guilt doesn't bring anyone back. That the best way to honor someone you've lost is to live the life they didn't get to live. To make different choices. To be brave enough to love again, even after you've been hurt. I looked around the garden at the benches positioned for optimal morning light, at the pathways that spiraled outward instead of inward, at the fountain with its sculpture of hands that reached but didn't quite touch. I'm going to keep building things, Claire. Memorial gardens for other people's losses. A business that's entirely mine. Maybe eventually a relationship with Thomas because he's kind and honest and he reminds me what it's like to trust someone completely. I'm going to keep choosing truth over comfort, honesty over security, and myself over people who can't love me the way I deserve. The sky was darkening now, the first stars appearing over Mount Hood. And Claire, I'm going to stop carrying guilt that isn't mine to carry. I'm going to forgive myself for being human. I'm going to trust that you're at peace wherever you are, and that you wouldn't want me to spend the rest of my life punishing myself for one mistake. I stood up, brushing cherry blossoms from my dress. Thank you for being my sister. Thank you for teaching me about courage and honesty and refusing to accept less than I deserve. Thank you for this garden which wouldn't exist if you hadn't lived and died and somehow managed to teach me everything I needed to know about rebuilding from ruins. I turned to leave, then stopped and looked back one more time at the fountain, at the reaching hands. I love you, Claire. I'll always love you. But I'm finally learning to live without you. And I hope that would make you proud. 1 year later, The dedication ceremony for Claire's memorial garden had been exactly 1 year ago, and I was back at the fountain this time, not alone. Thomas sat beside me on one of the benches, his hand warm in mine. We'd been officially dating for 6 months, slow, careful, honest dating where every step forward was discussed and agreed upon, where boundaries were respected and vulnerability was met with gentleness. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," I admitted. "What if I'm not ready? What if I mess this up?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Thomas said simply. That's what partners do. At exactly 3 p.m., Rachel appeared at the garden entrance pushing a stroller. Beside her, looking awkward but present, was Daniel. In the stroller was Lily Claire Kim, 9 months old, with Daniel's dark eyes and Rachel's blonde hair, and a personality that was entirely her own. She was babbling contentedly, waving a stuffed bunny. This was the arrangement we'd negotiated over many difficult conversations. Once a month, I would meet Rachel and Daniel at Claire's memorial garden. I would spend an hour with my niece, teaching her about the aunt she was named after, building a relationship that was separate from all the complicated history between the adults. "Hi, Vivian," Rachel said as they approached. She looked healthy, grounded, more at peace than I'd ever seen her. Motherhood suited her, or maybe it was the continued therapy and the honest co-parenting relationship she'd managed to build with Daniel. "Hi, Rachel. Hi, Daniel." Daniel nodded, still uncomfortable around me, but trying. He'd rebuilt his firm, slowly learned to be a decent father, started his own therapy. We weren't friends. We'd never be friends. But we could be civil for Lily's sake. "Say hi to Aunt Vivian," Rachel encouraged, lifting Lily from the stroller. I took my niece carefully, feeling the solid weight of her, smelling the baby-sweet scent of her hair. She looked up at me with those serious dark eyes and reached for my face with her chubby hands. "Hi, Lily," I said softly. "I'm your Aunt Vivian. And this garden, this is for another Lily, your great-aunt Claire. She would have loved you so much." Thomas watched us with that soft expression that told me he was imagining the future, the possibility of our own children someday when we were both ready. We'd talked about it carefully, honestly. Agreed that it was something we both wanted, but not yet. Not until we'd built an even stronger foundation. Rachel and Daniel took a walk around the garden, giving me space with Lily. Thomas stayed on the bench, close enough to help if I needed it, but far enough to let me have this moment. I walked with Lily to the fountain, showing her the sculpture of reaching hands. "Your great-aunt Claire taught me something important," I told her, even though she was too young to understand. "She taught me that you can't save everyone, that people make their own choices, that love means letting go when you need to and holding on when you can." Lily grabbed at a cherry blossom petal, floating past, laughing when it slipped through her fingers. "She also taught me about forgiveness, about rebuilding, about creating beauty from broken things. And someday when you're older, I'll tell you all about her, about how she was brave and strong and how she believed in second chances." I looked at Thomas, who smiled at me with such warmth it made my chest ache. "And I'll tell you about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to exactly where we need to be. About how betrayal can crack you open but also let the light in. About how you can lose everything and still find yourself in the ruins." Lily yawned, settling against my shoulder, her small body trusting and warm. "But mostly," I whispered, "I'll teach you what Claire taught me, that life is complicated and messy and sometimes people hurt each other. But if you're honest, if you're brave, if you're willing to do the hard work of facing truth instead of running from it, you can build something real, something lasting, something beautiful." Rachel and Daniel returned, and I handed Lily back to Rachel with a promise to see her again next month. As they walked away, two people who'd created a child from chaos but were learning to parent with honesty, I felt something settle in my chest. Peace. Not perfect peace, not the absence of pain or complication, but the peace that comes from knowing you've done the work, faced the truth, and built something real from the ashes of what burned down. Thomas stood and pulled me close, and we stood together beside the fountain beneath the cherry trees in the garden I'd built to honor my sister and ended up building to save myself. "Ready to go?" he asked. "Actually," I said, "can we stay a few more minutes? I want to show you the design for my next project. It's a healing garden for children who've lost parents. I'm thinking spiral pathways, but outward-facing instead of inward. Something that encourages movement and growth instead of introspection." Thomas's eyes lit up. He loved when I talked about my work. "Tell me about it." So I did. We sat on a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, and I pulled out my sketchbook, and I talked about designs and sightlines and how to create spaces that hold both grief and hope. And as the afternoon shadows lengthened and the Portland spring worked its magic around us, I realized something. This was it. This was the life I'd been building toward one honest choice at a time, a business I was proud of, work that mattered, a relationship built on truth instead of fantasy, a family connection I was choosing deliberately with clear boundaries and realistic expectations, and a memorial garden that would outlast all of us, helping people find beauty in their darkest moments. I'd lost my marriage. I'd lost my business partner. I'd lost years to guilt and grief and the belief that I didn't deserve forgiveness. But I'd found myself, and in the finding I'd discovered something Claire had known all along. You can't save everyone, but you can save yourself, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. Final note. If Vivian's story resonated with you, I hope you'll take away this truth. Betrayal is devastating. Guilt can consume you. Loss can break you open. But on the other side of all that pain is the possibility of building something real, something honest, something lasting, something beautiful. The best revenge against deception isn't cruelty or destruction. It's living so fully, so honestly, so courageously that you become grateful for the pain that forced you to demand better for yourself. Thank you for following Vivian's journey from devastation to reconstruction, from guilt to grace, from a woman defined by her failures to a woman defined by her choices. Like and subscribe if this story reminded you that you are always strong enough to choose truth over comfort, dignity over convenience, and self-respect over the illusion of security. Because everyone deserves a love story that doesn't require them to lose themselves in the process.